Good morning, everyone. I'll just give it 30 seconds or so to let people get through the lobby, and then we'll get going. Okay, right, we'll get going. I think we've got quite a few people joining us this morning, so expecting a few more to join as I preamble. Welcome to this webinar. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nathan Harpham. I'm a principal consultant at Agilysys, and I'm quite a familiar face now on these webinars that we do as part of the Road Safety GB Analyst Network. So today we're going to be discussing the recent STATS19 data release for 2024. And we're joined by a panel. So we'll kick off. Matthew's going to kick us off with a bit of preamble on the data release, how we might interpret things, new things this year, that kind of stuff. And then the rest of this session, which will be most of it, will have a chance for you guys to ask questions of our panelists. So it should be good fun, a very interesting topic, and a good time, I think, to be reviewing this and discussing the recent 19 data release for a number of reasons, not least because traffic has now returned to the same levels that we had pre-COVID in 2019. We're now nearly halfway through, well, we are halfway through in terms of actual time, in terms of data time, nearly halfway through the decade, the UN's second decade of action for road safety, in which many countries have pledged to a 50% reduction in fatalities and injuries by 2030. And also, we all eagerly await a new road safety strategy, hopefully in the autumn at some point. But while we dig into the numbers and trends, it's also important to remember that obviously these are all people that are tragically killed or seriously injured on our road network, not just numbers. Right, time to introduce our panelists. So today we're joined by Matthew and Will and Nicola. Right, Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, hello, I'm Matthew. I'm a statistician at the Department for Transport, and my team produces the annual road safety statistics, which we're going to discuss here later.
And Will?
Yes, Will Cubbin. I'm here as the Research Director for Road Safety GB. My day job is the Safe Essex Roads Partnership Manager.
Great. And we should have Nicola here with us, although I've not seen her yet.
I'm here.
Great.
Okay.
Good stuff, Nicola.
So I'm Nicola Christie. I'm Professor of Transport Safety in the Centre for Transport Studies at UCL and have been working on road safety for 40 years now.
Great. Good stuff. Thank you, guys. So throughout the webinar, please make use of the chat and the Q&A function. I'll do my best as we go to kind of bring questions together. There are lots of you here, so I'm hoping for lots of questions, and I'll try and group them together as needed. If you put questions in the Q&A, they'll be easier for me to see than the chat, but please use the chat as we go to comment on anything you find interesting or to have your own conversations if you're finding what we're saying slightly boring. Right, okay, let's get going then. So Matthew's going to kick us off for a few minutes, and then as we go, please do put questions in the Q&A. Over to you, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. If I can just find out how to share my screen. There's a button in this thing that says present in Teams. Is that going to work?
We'll see.
Just bear with.
While Matthew's doing that, I'm going to do a very quick plug for upcoming webinars. I'll put this up at the end as well, but our current statistics webinar series, we've got a whole more set of webinars lined up. So those of you that aren't here at the end, these are some dates for you. All right, I'll stop sharing and pass to you, Matthew.
Right. Okay. Is this actually gonna do something here?
I can see that.
It's not. Can you see anything meaningful? It's just.
Yeah, I can see the first slide. Yeah.
Okay, which more than I can see. Can you?
We've got lots of thumbs up as well, so it looks all
Yeah.
good
Apologies.
all
I
round.
think my computer's just taking a bit of time to warm up. So here we are. Okay, right. So you can see that one. So this is me. I work on safety statistics, as we've already covered, and my team produces the annual casualty stats. So I'm just going to run through very briefly a little bit about data, a little bit about the publication, the materials we published at the end of last month, and then start with some of my observations on the 2024 data to lead us into the discussion. And I'll try and get through this fairly quickly because I've been given strict timing. I can waffle on, so I'll rush through this. There's slides and there's lots of material on the gov.uk website if it goes too quick. So yes, about the data, I imagine this is familiar to most people here. We publish the statistics provisionally in May and then finally at the end of September each year. So we've just published the 2024 data. All the data is based on, all the figures are based on what the data that's supplied to us by police forces in Great Britain via the data collection system, which is known as STATS19. So that captures instances where officers attend a collision or where members of the public report them subsequently to the police. Not all collisions are in scope, so only those on the public highway involving at least one vehicle and where someone is injured, so no damage only in here. And I think it's probably widely known, but worth just noting, we're well aware that this is not a complete census of all collisions and casualties. There's a degree of underreporting, which is something just to keep in mind throughout the talk when we're considering the numbers. I was asked to just flag up some things to be aware of in relation to STATS19. So I think the biggest one is that STATS19 is reviewed periodically. I've said every 5 to 10 years. Yeah, maybe a bit less often in future, but the last review was in 2018. And the 2024 data that we're going to consider was the first year where we've started to capture some of the recommendations from that review in the data itself. It shouldn't really affect much of the discussion, but there are a few things to note. So yeah, as I've said there, the majority of forces are providing some data to the new specification, not all forces. And if you're in a force that's not yet adopted the new specification and can help us move things along, then that would be very much appreciated. The new specification covers a number of things. There's 4 main areas I've highlighted there. Injury-based reporting, which is a long-standing thing. I won't dwell on that, but the new specification will roll that out across all forces. There's some new variables coming, such as drug tests, which we haven't looked at yet. So watch this space for those. There's a number of more minor changes to some of the variables and values. For example, e-scooters are now coded with personal power transporters are now given their own category within the vehicle type variable. So there are a few small changes to our statistics and the data sets as a result of that, but generally at the margins. And the one thing I did just want to highlight here was the road safety factors, the new road safety factors. So I won't dwell on this. There's some guidance we've published on the web, which goes through it in more detail for anyone interested, but perhaps you're aware that the contributory factors, which have been part of STATS19 for roughly 20 years, have been replaced by a streamlined system of road safety factors with a smaller number of factors, hoping to make it easier for officers to code consistently and provide more useful analytical insight. So in 2024, we've started getting a mix of data from the new system, the road safety factors, and the old contributory factors, which can be converted into road safety factors. But what we noticed in doing this is that there are some differences between those two groups. So you can see the join. We've made some changes to how we're presenting road safety factors in our statistics. It may not be such an issue if you're looking at a more localized area, but it's something just perhaps to be aware of. I'm not actually going to talk about road safety factors any more than this, but I just wanted to flag up that as the main thing to note in terms of the changes in the 2024 data. And we're doing some work with Nathan and Agilicis to try and understand a little bit more about what's going on in this space. I'll rush through the stuff that we published on gov.uk. There's the link to the page, and it's all available from there somewhere. You're perhaps familiar with our annual report, so there's the front page of that. We've got a whole suite of fact sheets, cover various topics. We've just updated what we've got there. We've got around 40 statistical data tables with different breakdowns of the data. We've got our interactive tools, these ones for bespoke tabulations and mapping. I'm sure Agilysys will want me to say other tools are available, but these are our ones, and we've updated them with 2024 data. We make the open data available, and you can apply if you want the sensitive data for within the whole of GB, and there's a whole suite of guidance and background papers as well. So that's all been updated, and then we've got some new stuff. Again, I will very quickly go through this, and it's all available via the links or via that the gov.uk website somewhere. Some of it's buried away a little bit. So we're always trying to improve the report that we produce. So we finally got around to appropriating the PACS collision matrix that they produced for a number of years, which compares the casualty type of those killed in collisions with other vehicles involved. So I'm sure you know the sort of thing. That's in our report if you want to go and see the latest figures, and we'll be updating that every year. There's some interest in the department here about work-related collisions. So we've also sort of stolen some work from UCL as far as we were able to, and produced a little fact sheet on work-related collisions involving driving or riding for work. So roughly 1 in 3 fatalities in 2024 we estimate involving someone driving or riding for work, which is unsurprisingly in line with the UCL estimates. So a work in progress, but something we're hoping to develop further. We've added some data tables, one on hit and run collisions based on some feedback we had. We're continually updating our dashboard. So we focused on our Power BI dashboard, which presents some visualizations of the data, and you can filter this down and select particular police force areas or local authorities. So there's a screenshot from it. If there's anyone's got time to look at it and wants to give us some feedback, then we very much welcome that. We've updated the open data. They've got a slightly new home, which hopefully won't be a problem. And we've added some columns to reflect the variables in the new STATS19 specification. And then finally, we've updated some background documents and methodology materials, including the guidance around the new road safety factors that I've already alluded to. And we're also trying to explore data sources on STATS19 partly to validate what we're seeing in STATS19, but to bring some new insights. So we're in early days of a couple of things, which I will just flag. So the first thing is linking to health data. We've published a feasibility study for the southwest of England, linking STATS19 to a sample of ambulance service data. There's a link there if you're interested. And we hope this will be the first stage of a much wider project with the pre-hospital audit network, Prana, based in Southampton. So that's one thing. And then the second thing in that space is linking to ONS mortality data for fatalities in STATS19. Again, partly to just check we're getting the ones we should be, and also to look at what are the people that are dying in relation to roads or road vehicles that are being captured that are in scope of STATS19. So, for example, suicides, and we're trying to estimate how many road-related suicides there might be. So again, if interested, there's a link to the website there. So that's what's new this year. I will finally just say we're planning some relatively minor further changes going forward, mostly to our published data tables, including how we present figures for local authorities that no longer exist. So if that sort of thing is of interest to you, then there's a link to a short feedback survey there. So please go and fill that in. We're looking to capture any thoughts before we publish our next stats, which will be the first half of 2025 at the end of November. So finally, we're on to the 2024 stats. Here's a few observations from me. Obviously, there's a lot in here, so I couldn't pull out everything. I pulled out 1 or 2 things, so I've got 3 or 4 points here. So the first one is just to say, actually, there are some positive stories in the stats. So if you look at the number of fatalities, this shows the trend in road deaths over the last 100 years. And although we've still got 1,602 people that died in collisions in 2024, That's still 1,600 too many, but it's also the lowest figure outside of the pandemic affected years since we've been capturing this data. And again, I mean, this is familiar. We've got a good road safety, an enviable road safety record in Great Britain. But again, in 2024, we're ranking very well compared to other countries. And I'm not sure there's too many things these days where Britain ranks fourth in the world, but if you rank road deaths by per million population, then there we are in fourth place. So there are some positive things, and it's worth keeping that in mind. But of course, we all know that progress has been relatively slow over the last decade, and there are some other countries with similarly low rates of deaths per head of population that have made a lot more progress. So this is the change in fatalities per million people over the last 10 years. This is highlighting where we are, roughly a 10% reduction. But then, yes, you've got Norway, you've got Sweden, you've got Denmark, which are all countries with good records, which have made a lot more progress. So that's one way of illustrating that. And here's this chart again, and just there's the plateauing that we're all familiar with. And we haven't departed notably from that at this stage, even though there was a slight dip in the last couple of years. Just to zoom in on that 10-year period, here's the trend in fatalities. So there have been some reductions, but broadly a flat trend. Just to cover off the other severities as well, care size, slightly bigger reduction, but again flatlined over from about 2017 onwards, aside from the period where there was the pandemic. And what we can see in all of these charts is that we seem to have now come out of that pandemic period and returned to the pre-pandemic trends. And similarly, total casualties, where we see a bigger reduction. We tend to focus less on total casualties. I think we're a little bit more skeptical about whether some of these trends are real, whether there might be some things influencing the number of casualties recorded. But that's what the data shows. I haven't actually in here made any comparison with traffic in the interest of time, but as Nathan noted, we've got an upward trend in traffic over this decade. So if you looked at the casualty rates, they would show a slightly more positive trend. But generally, relatively slow progress this past decade. And then when I was trying to just look through some of the key breakdowns and find things that were different, actually, I came to the conclusion the things that I'd looked at very quickly, and focusing on fatalities here, which we tend to do. Some of the broad patterns here are very similar to what they were 10 years ago. So comparing 2014 in the lighter bars there with 2024 the darker bars, you can see a very broadly similar pattern in terms of the road user type of those people being killed in collisions. Similarly for demographics, so roughly 3/4 of fatalities are male, 76% in 2024, but it was also around now in 2014. There's a little bit of a shift in the age groups. There seem to be fewer young males dying in collisions, which I guess is a good thing. But again, broadly a similar sort of pattern. And then the final one, just to note, this is care size now. This is just, we can look at deprivation of casualties, and we can see roughly 12% of casualties occur in the most, or are people that are living in the most deprived 10% of areas. So there is an overrepresentation of people in more deprived areas among those killed and seriously injured in collisions, which has persisted for many years. So I think there's a lot of things here that are, the same challenges, the same issues are coming up, and that's obviously a challenge for the road safety strategy. One thing that has changed, or where there is some variation that I just wanted to finish with, was just to note this is change in the casualty KSI reductions or otherwise by police force area. So I'm not looking at the individual forces specifically, except to highlight the different countries in different colours. But just to highlight that there's quite a range here, from more than a 50% reduction to almost 40% increase. So it would be really good to get some more insight on why there might be these variations across the country. I don't know whether people here can help, but I think we're wondering, is that to do with the nature of collisions in different areas? Is it to do with the effectiveness of road safety interventions? Could it be something to do with variations in reporting? I don't think we've got the answers, but there's definitely a question there, and it's why we're trying to explore other sources than STATS19. That's me done. There's my initial takeaways. I will leave space for the others to talk and shut up, but I will just finish with one thing, which is the official line on the road safety strategy. So this is what I'm allowed to tell you about it. You can read it for yourself, but yes, like a good civil servant, more details will be set out in due course. That's me for a little while at least. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Matthew. That's a great intro. I noticed there was already a question in the chat. Bruce responded to that. Bruce is actually sat to my right, a bit of my my right-hand man, STATS19 expert. I'm sure he'll be active in the chat. Cool, thank you. Right, let's move on then. Will, I wonder if I can come to you next. Matthew's obviously highlighted a number of things that he's picked out there in terms of his summary. I wonder if you want to give us some things that you found particularly interesting from the data this year.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I had a chance to have a bit of a play with the data, and I decided to not try and repeat the excellent summary that DFT have on data.gov. And I was looking at 2024 compared to the average for the previous 2 years for certain factors. I chose that because I think from 2022 is when we started to have a bit of a clean break from COVID measures, albeit traffic levels weren't back up to pre-COVID levels, but it's a sort of a comparable period as a sort of post-COVID cutoff. There are a couple of things that jumped out and showed in the DFT summary as well. One particularly was the a drop in pedestrian and cyclist injury, and then when we bring in the National Travel Survey data and look at that as a rate as well, it's even more impressive. So by the measure that I was looking at, there was a nearly 8% drop in pedestrian KSI per million miles and a 6.5% drop in pedal cyclist, and that's against an increase in use. So it's one of those factors that yet more evidence for the safety in numbers theory, the safety in numbers effect that we might be seeing. But of course, there's going to be lots of other things going on. So as a single observation, it doesn't tell us much other than that it's worth investigating more to establish why. Another bit of good news that came out of it, I think you touched on it near the end, about the drop in young car drivers. That was as you said, in fatalities. I looked at involvements in all collisions for young drivers. So that is the net effect of their risk taking, their exposure, and their ability to avoid risks that other people pose. And that was a percentage-wise 1.6% drop, so not huge, but it was a drop nonetheless when involvements by other car drivers in collisions, especially across the sort of the middle-aged age groups, was increasing. So again, some good news there that's worth looking into. And then the final thing I noticed that I wanted to draw out, one of those things that could be seized upon by journalists in a negative way. There was quite a large increase in the number of collisions in 20-mile-an-hour roads, which, as we all know, is because there's been a large increase in the number of 20-mile-an-hour roads. The thing that provides context for that is there has been an even larger reduction in the collisions on 30-mile-an-hour roads. So the net change across 20 and 30-mile-an-hour roads is over 100 fewer KSI collisions. So again, that's important context around the information and the conversations that I had around 20 miles an hour. But I think a lot of that conversation continues perhaps outside of pure data and facts and starts to go into sort of politics and emotions that kind of govern people's views and decisions around that area. But I perhaps one of those things to look out for if you get journalists or others saying there's been a big increase in 20 mile an hour KSI, that's a decent counterpoint to anyone asserting that piece of information. So yeah, I've got a few other things I picked out, but those are really the main things I thought were most interesting to draw attention to, and perhaps avenues for further investigation.
Great, thanks, Will. And I think actually that point around 20 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour roads, it highlights the importance of context and calculating rates, using road lengths, using travel, etc., to make sure we're contextualizing the figures appropriately before we interpret them. Lots of stuff there we can pick up later. Also, just to say on comments and questions that are coming in, Matthew, if you can answer those quickly and directly in the chat, then I won't throw them out to the panelists. Same, Bruce, to you, if you can answer them quickly, or if anyone else can, if they're specific to kind of technical details. I'll try and keep the general questions more towards the panelists. Right, Nicola, great to have you with us. What were your key takeaways from this year?
Well, firstly, I think the Department for Transport is commendable in the amount of research that it does. And for me, one of the headline things, having a background in looking at the relationship between road casualties and deprivation, is that relationship still persists. I didn't see any trend data, and I think it'd be very interesting to look at the trend data in how we're doing with regard to deprivation. And I'm very much hoping that something will come in the road safety strategy to have a bit more targeted approach. My second thing is really looking at those people who were injured by drivers who are driving for work. And I think this is an area that really does need a lot of attention. I saw in the brief from on the press release that there is going to be looking at using their National Travel Survey definitions of work purpose. So that, Matthew, I think it's just literally, isn't it, just commute or other, so that we won't be able to disentangle. So I obviously have a deep interest in the gig economy and people who are riding, making deliveries and things like that. And you can see also that, you know, the small vans are a problem, and how much of that do we know is the delivery sector and how that's playing out on our roads. So they were my kind of key takeaways. I would always like to see KSIs presented rather than all casualty types. That is my preference. So they were my kind of key takeaways, and obviously for the fatalities we are plateauing and going up for some groups, so that is a concern. Given that the Department for Transport has the hierarchy of road users, we should be really putting pedestrians at the top of what we do. And also this would also play into the deprivation, where young people are most at risk in deprived areas as pedestrians. So I think we do need some very much targeted resources in that area. So they were my kind of key takeaways. But, you know, very few, from a deprivation point of view, I don't know of any other country in the world that routinely analyses data like this. So maybe a bit more of a deep dive into this and trend data, how we're doing, would be great. But, you know, it's great to have this data.
Thanks, Nicola. Different points there to the ones that Will brought out as well, which is good. Right, we've got loads of questions already, so let's jump in. And also, if you like questions, do thumbs up or react to them, so I can put the kind of top priority ones first. Right, got a question from Saul here. Good to see you, Saul. This is about work-related journeys. Whilst the estimates of work-related journeys are useful and welcome, we need actual data with greater granularity to develop and evaluate well-targeted interventions. How do the panel suggest that we might achieve this? Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, I think it'd be great to have some kind of commissioned research. I would say that I'm a researcher, wouldn't I? But something along the lines so that we can understand that group who are driving for work. What, you know, are they in logistics? Are they just people who are skilled work, people going around their normal day? What do we know of the people that are involved in these conditions? So I think we do need that more nuanced picture. How we get that could be, you know, as I said, a deep dive into that data somehow, or to commission research into it. So we know the gig economy is playing out. We know delivery drivers. are all under pressure. So we've got all these things to consider, and especially with the kind of more disruptive things like the platform workers and the massive exponential growth in e-commerce, how that plays out in delivery. So I think we need a much better understanding of that and some more focused interventions. And I'm sure Sean is, if Sean is on the call, that we know that there are very few interventions that we know are successful in this area, and there are massive economic levers and drivers, including things like shortages of drivers, where people have to make trade-offs, in companies. So that's what I have to say about that.
You will, Matthew, anything to comment on that one in terms of gathering more data, using more data around work-related journeys?
Yeah, I mean, within STATS19, the journey purpose field has journey as part of work as one of the options to distinguish it from commuting. But it's not a mandatory field, so it's quite often blank. In many cases, especially if it's reported by the public, it might not be possible to know. There is a certain amount of opportunity for greater insight by increasing the data completeness and the data quality of that field. So demonstrating the usefulness to police forces in really trying their best to improve that data, and then that might enhance the ability to infer certain things by combining vehicle type, profile of driver, and whether it was journey as part of work. But that can only go so far. That approach will have its limitations. So certainly Nicola said about further research that's perhaps outside of STATS19, that looks at engagement with businesses to look at where their risk comes from, and whether we're looking at larger businesses with organised fleet, and what the risk profile for them is versus gig economy versus self-employed. So there's definitely a research piece there to look at which types of work journey need to be the priority in terms of focusing on their risk.
Great, thanks. You're preempting one of my later questions about research topics that we should dig into further. Okay, I think there's one here for you, Matthew, from Mark. With a number of authorities, partnerships concentrating on, I'm guessing KVSIs is killed and very seriously injured casualties, are there any plans to publish separate KVSI focused data? I know that some authorities are already reporting on these and breaking down their serious into different categories.
Yeah, so I mean, I glossed over the injury-based reporting, which gives us a list of 20 injuries, the most serious of which then is used to code the severity, which gives us what we call the enhanced severity, which then breaks down the serious category into very seriously, moderately seriously, and less seriously injured. So we've got about, I had to cut stuff in the interest of time, but we've got about 80% of the data is now coming through with that injury-based approach. For the first time this year, we've managed to capture some stuff for London, not necessarily the injury breakdown, but the very moderately and less serious breakdown of the serious category. We've got a fact sheet on that, which provides the data we have got. We haven't really considered how we will roll that out into the main stats. We're probably waiting until we've got all the forces that provide that data, but we are publishing what we've got, and we will share anything. It's included, I think, in the open data, and we will share anything. The injury breakdowns are considered more sensitive if that's of interest. So yeah, really good question, and something we're hoping to develop further in the coming years. What would be a great help, and I mean, it sounds like a broken record, is for all the forces to move to the new specification, and it's taking us a little bit longer than we'd hoped to get to that point. And even if a force moves, if force adopts the new specification early 2026, then we're not looking at that data until towards the back end of 2027. So it's a little while off. But for some forces, it can be done. Manchester are using enhanced severity and monitoring targets for their strategy, I think. So definitely encourage more use of that data.
Thank you. And just while we're on you, Matthew, a question from Joanna about road safety factors. I suspect we're going to be talking about road safety factors a lot more over the next few years. And of course, you hinted at some research we're doing at the moment into those. So Joanna asks, what's the reason for not sharing the road safety factors in terms of their classification as sensitive? What can you say on that one?
So obviously this relates to record level, collision level recording. We obviously publish data tables with the factors in, and until recently we had some local authority breakdowns of the different factors. There was some work done by the ONS and the Office of National Statistics to look at the disclosure risks related to road safety factors a few years ago. So we're following their advice and the advice, I think, of our data protection team here, that some of the factors could be potentially sensitive if they relate to someone being under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or in the police officer's opinion, or potentially speeding. And in the same way, we don't release data on seatbelt wearing or helmet wearing, which we consider might apply blame to an individual user that could then, in conjunction with stuff in the public domain, be be problematic. So I think we are on the side of caution. What we do is, if people want to request the data under a, there's a form on our in the background pages on our website somewhere where you can complete that, request the data as a sensitive data extract, and provided you're not going to release anything small numbers into the public domain, then we will almost always agree to those requests. Then the ones we get are valid, are almost always valid, so we will almost always say yes to them. So it's not that we won't make the data available, it's just that we won't publish it openly. I do know that some other areas take a slightly different view to us, but we follow the advice we've had in the past. It's something we've got on the list to revisit, but we haven't got around to that yet.
Well, thanks, Matthew. And staying on the topic of road safety factors, I think if I read your slides right, there's about 30% of forces using road safety factors. Is that right, Matthew?
30% of collisions are recorded, or 30% of the factors we've got. 30% of the collisions where a police officer attended and recorded a factor it's road safety factors that are being captured and natively captured. So there are some others that come to us through the crash system, for example, where the data comes to us and it's coded as road safety factors, but it's actually been recorded as contributory factors and just mapped across. So there's 30% of sort of real RSS, if you like.
Yeah, great.
And that'll be more than half next year. Almost.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the progression for that, obviously expecting that that's going to grow quite quickly. So very soon we'll have more road safety factors than contributory factors, which will potentially unlock some new kinds of analyses and different insight. So I guess a question to throw out to all of our panelists is, with the introduction of road safety factors, more in line with the safe system, and the increase, particularly next year when we'll have more than half of forces hopefully using those, are there any new kinds of analyses, new kinds of insight that you think the road safety factors might unlock for us?
I think perhaps the first thing to do is look at the impact of that change, which I know there is a project ongoing to examine that change from CFs to RSFs. So that's obviously going to affect any trend analysis that spans the change in 2024. In terms of looking at them in more detail, I think the road safety factors are a better reflection of the safe system, and they mitigate somewhat the tendency to pick the more vague factors, the fail to look properly, etc. And I think we need to kind of first of all understand how those factors are being used. That what was an excellent decision by the DFT was having the RSFs and CFs mapped on to common groupings. But what we're seeing so far in the data that's coming through is simply how the road safety factors are presented appears to be influencing how they're chosen. So it's still down to kind of the officers those factors speak to the officer, what they feel is the most appropriate one to allocate to that collision. And so that change does complicate it. So the first step is really to understand how they're applied, and then I think after that stage we've got the opportunity to gain that additional insight into those underlying causes and how they relate to different layers of protection in the safe system.
And Nicola, I noticed you unmuted a few minutes ago. Did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah. I think this whole point of how they're actually used and what do we know about the biases that exist on the ground and how road safety factors are attributed to a crash. I'm sure there is police training on this, handbooks, whatever, but to know how they're actually doing it, because it's an admin task, which in the event can be very complex at a time when there's lots of things to do. So years ago, I can remember suggesting some kind of, look at how do police officers attribute to crashes, and what are the structural biases? If you see a young driver that's crashed, are there structural biases around reckless speeding, so on? I don't really understand the word reckless anyway. I think it doesn't give an awful lot of information. But so what are people saying about the collisions, and is there any kind of independent verification of the factors that are attributed? But it's going to help us again with more detailed data, so that can be a good thing. But that is a caveat on how people are doing it.
There's questions in the chat around that area around officer training, and yes, it seems, as far as I'm aware, to be quite variable, and will depend, like a lot of things, on what the priorities are within that individual police force, how much priority they put into data quality and road safety as a whole, will relate to how much training, which will then govern the quality and the consistency of that data coming back. So I think it's likely that to address that issue, to address the variability in data quality, and the absolute level of quality, is to make that a priority for police forces as a whole. And that's a sort of a high level political problem.
And talking of kind of data quality, reporting, etc., one of the things I noticed in this year's data, and particularly comparing with 2014, is that the decrease in all casualties is a lot more than the decrease in serious injuries and fatalities. Why do we think that is? Is that purely an artifact of different reporting, under-reporting? Could it be an artifact of injury-based reporting coming in? Is it something else? How do we kind of weigh those two things up?
That's
Maybe
a very difficult one. I think there's lots of plausible hypotheses on that, and everything you mentioned sounds very plausible to me. I'm not aware of any of those that have been particularly tested, but it would be great to hear if there is anyone out there who has been able to test some of those.
Great. Welcome hypotheses on that in the chat, if anyone's got anything to say on that. Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, we welcome hypotheses as well, or we'd welcome evidence that's actually able to explore them, because as you both alluded to, there are lots of potential reasons here, and we've not been able to pin anything down despite looking at this for some couple of decades, I would say. For the fatals and the more serious, we can link to other data sets and get some sense of, and we can compare trends in hospital admissions, and you could do some work and get some clues. But for the slides, I think it's quite tricky. As I say, we don't tend to trust those trends quite as much, but that's not really based on any evidence. It's just a sense there might be something going on, but it could be the nature of collisions. I doubt it's anything to do with the injury-based reporting, because that would just affect the serious slight boundary, and it wouldn't have a massive impact on the overall total, I wouldn't think. But I wonder, could it be something about the nature of collisions? You're getting less minor collisions. When it's a serious, it's still a serious, but the minor ones are not happening. But yeah, I don't think we really know anything on that. So if anyone has got any ideas, it would be very much appreciated. And I think we are, as I said, we are trying to explore other data sets and get a sense of the ground truth and validate some of these severity trends and patterns, particularly for the more serious collisions. But we are struggling to get hold of a comprehensive comparator data set. And of course, all data sets have their limitations. So if you look at hospital admissions, they can be influenced by admission practices and policies and waiting time targets and so on and so forth. So it is quite difficult to get to the actual underlying truth sometimes.
Yeah, cool. Interestingly, I asked ChatGPT on the train this morning what it thought about the difference between all casualties and fatalities and serious injuries, and I think it said probably due to underreporting and the introduction of injury-based reporting. Well, that's true or not, who knows? Right. We've had a couple of questions on kind of data and new factors. So a question a while ago about measuring drug driving. So I'm not familiar with the exact source, RTA Sec 5A, that's been referenced for 10 years now. But how do we expect ministers to change our laws and reduce the ever increasing drug driving problem? Matthew, I know you mentioned drug driving data earlier, so maybe you can come in on that. And then we've also had a question about technology. Can technology, for example, mobile phone and sat-nav black boxes, etc., be used to check police officer assessments of factors, or to pre-populate some data around road types, speed limits, etc., using, say, what 3 words? So either of those things, does anyone want to comment on those?
I can start on the drugs one if that's okay. I can just say what we're doing from the data perspective. I obviously can't talk about policy. That's someone else's job, and wait for the road safety strategy, I think, is all I can say on that. But we are trying to develop the evidence base on drug driving. We are trying to develop the statistics. So for a number of years now, we've published a sort of a feasibility. So we have a lot of feasibility studies, some of which haven't really progressed, but we are getting data from coroners for people that die in collisions, and we're getting some information on their toxicology, which we've been using to estimate what portion might have illicit drugs. And the new STATS19 specification will now provide some high-level information on roadside drugs tests. We haven't looked at that. We haven't got a sense of how good that'll be, but it's something that we are hoping to have something broadly equivalent to the drink drive stats. It's much harder, obviously, to get drugs because there are so many different drugs. They can have so many different effects. I'm not a scientist that understands these things, anywhere near as much as perhaps I should do. But we have that aspiration. So it's a work in progress, but we are trying to do it. And what I would say is that, so if you look at contributing factors, road safety factors, we can see, and again, maybe it's a perception thing, maybe it's an awareness thing, but we are seeing a rise in the proportion of collisions with drugs being coded as a contributing road safety factor. So it does seem to be a growing issue.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely a underreporting issue with drugs, especially compared to drink drive, because of the complexities in obtaining the evidential sample and the time it takes to get that information back. So the difference between what's recorded on STATS19 and what is eventually known after a fatal investigation is much bigger for drugs than it is for drink. So part of the solution is in streamlining that process. I spent a couple of days last week reviewing 2024 fatal investigation files, specifically looking for drug tox results. And there are some of those files which for 2024 still haven't been returned. So even the fatal data isn't back yet for 2024. So there's potentially some that would never be updated unless we extended the updating reporting deadline for multiple years. So really, I think there is some gains to be had in terms of building that evidence base by allowing the fatals investigations to feed back into the STATS19 data. But I think that will only go so far. I think it's the streamlining of the gathering of that evidence, I think is a solution that will both improve data quality but also improve the criminal justice process as well. So I think that's really where the focus should be.
Cool, thanks. Right, a question I suppose to somewhat bring us into land at this point around research. So, I mean, however we look at the stats, really we've been flatlining in the last 15 years. We can see that. So clearly there's a lot of work to do. I also picked out some particular areas where progress has been very minimal in the last 10 years. Motorcyclist fatalities were up 8% this year, which is a reflection of no change at all since 2014. We're back to 2014 levels. Male fatalities decreasing a lot less than female fatalities, and actually the older age groups, I noticed, I think you shared, Matthew, earlier, for male fatalities going up this year. We've still got challenges with deprivation, with those in more deprived communities seeing greater rates of casualties, crashes. Driving for work's another area that's come up. There are lots of areas we need to work on and we need better evidence for. So I'm going to throw out a question to all of you guys. Of all of the things that you're seeing in the 2024 STATS19 data and all of the trends that you're seeing, what do you think the key research areas are? What in particular do we need more evidence on? What should our focus areas be? And maybe Nicola, I'll throw this one to you first, just someone who I know is involved in quite a lot of research in these different areas already.
Okay, so I think we really do need to know the whole thing about work-related road safety. Who are the casualties? What are they doing? Is it part of the gig economy? Because I noticed some of the work-related ones were around motorcycles. So what do we know? What proportion of those casualties and the lack of progress is because of the gig economy riders? I'd also throw in the whole thing about e-bikes, which we haven't had any information on this, but we know the gig economy are using e-bikes a lot more because it's a low barrier to entry. You don't need a license, insurance, or a helmet. I think we know a lot about the work-related road safety. We don't really know what interventions are effective. And people talk about telematics, but we have done a couple of papers on this, and actually telematics data is, having the capacity to look at that data, understand it in a way that's digestible is problematic, and what they do afterwards. So often it's used punitively rather than actually maybe rewarding good behaviour. So intervention approaches directed, but what sector? So we need to understand what segment of these people are driving for work. In terms of deprivation, we know loads of things around what is happening in deprived areas. So we know that obviously there's more dependence on walking. So let's create, and is it part of a civic responsibility to create safe areas for people, for their citizens? And we know there is more antisocial and crime-related vehicle behaviour in these areas as well. So there's a whole constellation of factors that need to be addressed in a kind of, a cross-agency approach. So I'll just say that because we're running out of time. But yeah, so intervention approaches that are properly evaluated are really important.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Will, I wonder if I could throw that one to you now. You are research director at Road Safety GB after all, so I think you'd have some opinions on this.
Yeah, no pressure. No, I think I didn't want to. I know Nicola has a particular interest in the deprivation side of things, and I think that is definitely a very fertile area for further research. And I'm aware of a research project looking at deprivation that is just getting underway now, and that's around deprivation with respect to access to vehicle safety features and more modern vehicles. So there's quite a lot to be learned around there, and I think that's one of the biggest areas of difference between outcomes is, I think, predicted by deprivation more than anything else. And again, as Nicola mentioned, e-bikes and gig economy. Related to that again is also the e-scooters, and that now we have that category in STATS19. It makes picking out that data a lot easier to conduct research into that area. I think one bit where we're perhaps missing a trick is the distinction between the privately owned and the hire schemes. From the evidence I've seen, it suggests, and one would hope, the hire schemes have a better safety record than privately owned scooters. But being better able to quantify that difference would certainly help extract the learning from the hire schemes that could be applied to a regulation of e-scooters. They can't be put back in the box, whether you see them as a big safety risk or an excellent thing for clean urban transport. They're not being uninvented, so they need to be regulated to maximize the safety of them. And in sort of linking that in to one of the earlier comments on the chat about the cause or permit offence around speed, and that was talking about people driving for business and businesses putting pressure on employees to speed, whether those businesses could be prosecuted under a cause or permit offence. That approach has been suggested for parents who allow younger children to use e-scooters. So again, an evidence base around that, with more research into the risks and who's using e-scooters and who's most at risk, I think is an area that needs to be looked at as well.
Great, thanks, Will. And then finally, Matthew, I'll throw the question to you. You already mentioned publishing some results on links with health data. What other things do you think maybe come out of this data that you'd like to explore more?
So I mean, the first one, just to go back to the health stuff. So yeah, we hope that will give us a better understanding of some of the trends in STATS19, help to validate that, but also a lot more about the risk profile, bringing a lot of different data sets together, not just health, fire service, potentially DWP, HMRC records as well, to get an idea of what happens to people, what the longer term consequences of collisions. This is not my team that's work, but there is work ongoing in the department, and getting a better handle on the cost of collisions as well. We know that methodology is somewhat long in the tooth. But more generally, I think for me, it's sort of Will stole my thunder there. Really, the vehicles work, and that project that's going on in relation to deprivation, I think is a fascinating piece. I don't think we do enough to link for the STATS19 data to the vehicle safety features. It feels like there's space to do more there. I know there's a lot of in-depth research that's done there, but I think for the general sort of the general STATS19 data, I feel like there should be more that we could be doing. And the other one I'll just throw in briefly, because it's come up relatively recently within the department, is ethnicity. There has been some interest, and that's something that's not captured in STATS19, and is explicitly not captured. It was considered in the last review, and was not considered suitable for the police to record for good reason. But what other data sources are there that might shed some light on that? And indeed, should we even be trying to explore that area? I don't know, but that's one that's been mooted. So yeah, a few things there.
Great, thank you. I've been trying to keep up with the chat, but honestly, it's been moving far too fast for me to keep up with it. I almost want to leave the webinar open so that people can just keep chatting. Anyway, we ought to bring it to a close. I want to be respectful of people's time. Thank you very much to Matthew, Will, and Nicola for joining us. A really interesting and informative discussion, I think. Just to reiterate something I said at the start about future webinars, we've been doing a series at the moment on best practice statistics, particularly in terms of using stats for collision and casualty data. So we had the intro to that. Myself and my colleague Drishti did an introduction to that back in September. And we've got parts 2, 3, 4, and 5 lined up over the next couple of months for you. So do join us for those. It should be interesting to hear perspectives from local authority, from TRL, Transport for London, and from National Highways as we dig into that topic a bit further. And if you have any ideas to contribute to that series, or you want to join the discussion, please just drop me an email, let me know. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us. Great discussion in the chat. Stay safe out there and enjoy the rest of your days. Cheerio.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye.